People keep threatening to actually buy me a cape, but nobody's done it yet. So, so I want to start off today just sharing a little bit about the two roles that I want to bringing the information I'm bringing to you today. One is IIW, and it's really where the work of the first half of my presentation has emerged in terms of understanding identity, which I think is really key. A lot of you deal with it day to day, but have you taken the time to just step back and ask the questions about what it really is and what are the implications for society? And then looking ahead into the future beyond authentication and attribute provision, and do you have access to the resources? What about all the data we're generating as we use our digital devices, as we walk around and devices are capturing our activity, with little fitness things that are tracking our health. There's a whole range of things happening, and what are the implications of this, and actually how can higher education, as a sector and as your own institutions get involved in helping lead the way so that all this data can actually be of use to people, of use to businesses, and of use to society. So that's where we'll end up. So I thought I'd start by this basic question: what is identity? And rather than answer it, I thought I'd invite you all to do a little bit of introspection and just take a piece of paper out right now, or you have them there, pens and papers, and just write down some of the different contexts that you navigate in your life. So where do you go online? Who are you in those different places? What are your different roles as you move about your whole life, from when you get up in the morning to when you go to sleep on all days of the week? We'll take a minute. Okay, you can keep writing, but I'm sure you've got a few written down now. In thinking about identities and how we show up in different places, there's two ways. So one is thinking about how each of our personas, each different aspect of ourselves, we might separate them out, and we might show up and play World of Warcraft with our World of Warcraft sort of gaming handle, and then show up at work with a totally different persona, and we're using two different personas in two different contexts, right? Now, if we had two different World of Warcraft accounts or handles, and we showed up in the same context, which is that game, we'd be bringing two different personas into the same context. And I think this is pretty common in different sort of social online use cases where people, and especially young people, are experimenting with different types of identity, and they're showing up in the same place and trying different hats on and how they present themselves. And then this is the sort of use case that we're using a lot in higher education, where we're taking our student identity and we're moving between institutions, between different contexts, and we're taking the same persona with us to multiple contexts. So I wrote these down, sort of a list of different contexts that I'm imagining some of what you wrote down fit into in terms of the different aspects of self in different places where we might show up online. And we're not just, we take on different roles as we navigate the world, and we show up differently in different contexts. So with that, we'll go back to this question, what is identity? And I think that this encompasses almost all of it. It's that it's socially constructed and it's contextual. So we're creating all the different social contexts in which we appear, and we make up as a society what the norms are, what the rules are for those different places. How we behave in our church life, our religious life is different than how we show up at work, how we show up in a gaming context is different. And the same is true for all of these identifier systems, all the technical systems that identity runs on, we're also building those. So even the notion of a phone number, we built that system. We can change it. These aren't just givens that are handed to us. We have to question them and think about them more deeply as we sort of, if we just take everything as a given, we can't really think creatively and build new systems in ways that work for us. So in thinking about identity, we often end up stuck in a sort of, on the two ends of the spectrum, as if there's nothing in the middle, right? You're either totally verified and we know who you are, or you're just anonymous and we know nothing. And in fact, there's a whole range of things in the middle. And there's actually diversity on the end. So with anonymous identities, those are identities where you sort of show up on a website and you never go back there again. Or if you go back there again, you're a different person. You have a different identity the next session. And there's even sites like 4chan where every single post you do isn't even linked to the post you did within the same session. And these are really interesting places to be. I don't hang out on them much. But they're very culturally creative. It's where LOL cats came from. It's where a whole bunch of internet memes have emerged. And it's a way of expression on the net that's a part of it. And at the other end, you have verified identities. So presenting some sort of documentation, in-person verification. So this is sort of what happens when you show up as a student. You have to say, yes, I'm John Smith and I'm now a student. You present your ID. The school will then issue another ID to you probably. And then biometric capture is where you're sort of also seeing if some aspect of the person's physical self is matching to something you have on record. But how many of you today, when you met somebody new, asked to see their government-issued paperwork to know who they were? Any of you? Did they even ask for your government-issued ID when you got your badge at the front? No. So how do we even know who anybody is? Right? Most of our lives we spend not over there, but in a social context where we're socially validated, right? Andy just told you who I am. And in this way that we're pointing at each other, that's one way we're building identities. That has nothing to do with what's on our paperwork. We're self-asserting our identity. So when you walk up and say hello to someone, like, my name's Kaliya. You all do that every day. And in online life, we have pseudonyms. And I've defined these as, you can have it on one site, which is basically your username and password on a site that you go back to again and again and again. And if you can have portability of that pseudonym, you can take it with you from place to place to place. Just like you can take your physical body with you from place to place, we need to have ways that people can sort of take their digital selves with them around the web so they don't have to reconstruct an identity every time they walk into a new website or service or context. Now, we can play with these and see how they go together. So a lot of folks on Twitter don't actually use a real name, aren't linking to their verified identity in any way. And so they have socially validated pseudonyms because thousands of people follow them. They're not spamming because otherwise thousands of people wouldn't follow them. We don't necessarily know what their real so-called identities are. And we have a lot of this sort of self-asserted, socially validated identity happening in Facebook and LinkedIn, where people are asserting an identity as a professional. Other people are validating that identity as well. Now, this next part I get to play with other pieces of the spectrum. So, how do you do verified anonymity, right? It's a big question. And in fact, this is a huge part of our modern democratic life. We do it all the time when we vote. There's some assertion of attributes that we have when we register to vote, and we show up at a voting booth and we say, this is me. They go, yep, you're on the list. And they hand you a ballot and you walk out the other end, you fill it out and you put it in a box and you just anonymize your vote. Now, can we do this online as well? Can we support people being able to bring sort of verified credentials to the table, scrubbing them of specifically identifiable information and allowing them to take action based on those attributes? One is like speaking. It's more a big deal in the United States, but I'm pretty sure it's also valid here. Like a city council would want to hear from residents of the city. Not everybody necessarily wants to express their real name in association with those comments. You know, maybe it's because their position, you know, is head of the hospital or whatever. I hear this all the time from professionals. They're like, yeah, I can't say anything about my local politics because it's not appropriate for someone like me to have an opinion. But why shouldn't they be able to say? Other uses, you know, accessing material that's only appropriate for certain age groups, other things like this. So there are tools that do this. They haven't gotten market adoption, right? This is where UProve, which is the Stefan Brand's technology that was purchased by Microsoft, kind of lives. IBM has ID Mixer. Will this become widespread in our industry? I don't know. I think it's a good thing to support and have, but we'll see. This space, pseudonymous, verified pseudonymity. Now the problem with this is if I have a pseudonym, I'm a identity woman, and I say, oh, it's linked to Kaliya, I've just like made an explicit link between my pseudonym and my verified identity. Not everybody wants to do that for lots of good reasons, which we'll see next. So is there a way to kind of bridge this gap where folks who use pseudonyms are, there's sort of this one thread of an internet meme that they're totally unaccountable because we don't know who they are. And it's like, actually, they just don't want to necessarily link these two things together in public for various reasons, but they're completely willing to be totally accountable for their actions. They're not doing fraudulent things. They're not doing illegal things online. And in fact, can we create a new social type of institution that allows people to link a verified identity with a pseudonym to take responsibility for their actions, but not have to reveal their real name everywhere they go? And so this sort of, you know, is this done through the courts? Is it done through a nonprofit organization? Is it done through a company who sort of allows people to make this link behind a shield and have it be revealed if they do something wrong? So this term actually was developed by Bob Blakely, and you can read his post online about it, the limited liability persona. Another way to think about it is how do you create a pseudonymous identity that has some power to do transactions in the world, like make purchases, but maybe you set a limit so it's no higher than 500. So if this persona gets compromised in some identity theft thing, there's only so much it can lose because it only has limited powers that you gave that persona. So this seemed like an appropriate spot to sort of mention what's going on with both US and UK government efforts around identity. A huge amount of it is focused on the verified identity side of the spectrum. UK government is working with the Open Identity Exchange to sort of figure out what the qualifications are to be an identity provider, as in verifying citizens' identities and then accepting those identities at government services sites. It's pretty straightforward. In the US, there's something more complicated going on 2 years ago, they released something called the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, and they have just recently spun up the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, and they're thinking on a bigger scale of not just having the government, of not having the government sort of doink certain identity providers on the head, but really asking the question, how do you get more interoperability of identity credentials across large-scale systems? And how do you build a whole ecosystem? I happen to be on the management council of this thing. We'll see how it goes. We were supposed to have a meeting last week, but there was a hurricane. Which luckily I didn't have to fly through, but they're different in their approaches to this whole problem. And the challenge that I see with them is they're so focused on the verified side of things that they're missing the whole spectrum of identity, and they're going, if we're not careful, end up sort of eliminating, you know, being so focused that this type of identity need and transactions get lost. And I'm often in rooms, and this is, I guess, more so true in Silicon Valley. Higher education is used to thinking about academic freedom and the freedom to go to the library next door and not reveal your identity. You are librarians, that's your job, right? That individuals move across different contexts, and these are contexts that individuals don't necessarily want linked together. And this is my sort of like, this includes women not wanting to present as women. This is a story of a woman who pretended to be a man for 2 years while she developed her copy editing business. And the reason she pretended to be a man was when she applied for the same jobs as a woman, she didn't get them. She's like, they're online jobs for copy editing. I'll just present myself as a man. And she developed a very successful business. Same person, same qualifications, couldn't get jobs, just being a woman. Ethnic and racial minorities who don't want to present that online when they're showing up. I know folks who like, who are African American in the United States who are like, there are no pictures of me online, nobody knows my race until I show up in a meeting with them. Religious expression, how do we just allow freedom of that? Sexual minorities. Now, this is an interesting one. Apparently gay men suffer very little oppression these days, because I keep having gay guys come up to me and go, oh, there's no problem. I'm like, right, but you're not the only sexual minority on the planet, so maybe you need to stay in solidarity with some other folks who are also not free in that dimension of self. Political expression, personal expression, medical issues, family issues, mental health things. Goofy habits and hobbies. And just kids being able to explore without everything being linked back to their real identity for their whole internet life. So we go back to this, it's socially constructed and contextual. Now, this is a transition point. We're going to talk about data. So people generate data. In fact, maybe we'll do a little bit of reflection. Think about all the devices you use. And if all of them talk to the internet, how many, you know, they're not talking to the internet today. In 10 years, they will all be talking to the internet. It's a lot of data. So there's this whole big data thing. Part of that is about just the amount of data that's being generated throughout our activity in daily life. And then you have the dark side, right? Less control than ever. So this top is 1984, which is one sort of the Orwellian metaphor of where we're going with this data. But I think more importantly, Daniel Solov's work, and particularly this book, it's old now, it's written in 2004, called The Digital Person. He said, you know, we keep going to this Orwellian metaphor, and that may be the wrong one for what's happening to us. He says Kafka, the trial, may be more like it, because all this data that we're generating kind of goes out there into the world, and we don't see how it comes back to affect us, and we can't figure it out, yet it impacts our lives. So this is another magazine cover, Your Data for Sale, on Time magazine about a year ago. And this is this kind of, we are spreading data like crazy. So this is the individual in the center. These are different aspects of our lives where we're interacting with different services. All of them are computerized. Many of these services take the data about us and sell it to another ring of, or share it with another ring of data brokers. Now, granted, sort of like in the EU it's different, yes, but a lot of the terms of service and conditions are now written in a way to allow this kind of sharing, and you all just click through onto them. Because we ask permission, right? Yes. In the US, when you share data with an entity, they can do whatever they want with it unless it's regulated, which is different than here where you share data about yourself. There's some default protections, but these practices are widespread across the whole world. And if you talk to folks like Experian, they're like, we have 500 million households worldwide. And you're like, ah! Those data brokers in the United States have about 1,500 data points on every household. They know like all of your addresses for years, etc. So then, data collectors, data brokers, data users, all these different types of entities use data, and it all comes back to affect the individual. And the individual has very little awareness, has not really consented to all of this happening, and is really out of the loop. And it doesn't have to be this way, particularly since we have little computers in our pockets now. We didn't have those when these industries first developed in the 1970s. So that's what I've been working on, is helping transform these things. So there's these sort of people don't care that all of this is happening. I think people do care, they're just they can't do anything about it yet. This is from a survey of US households done by phone by Unisys Security. And they asked them what they're most worried about securing. Top saying personal information. That was above credit card security, above national security, all these other things. Well above personal safety, which is down there on the bottom. So, of course, the answer is just do not track, right? We're gonna put do not track in all the browsers, turn it on automatically, and we're gonna ask everybody about every cookie, right? You all are doing that now? Like, is that really the answer? And I think it isn't. I think we need to think more creatively, and we need to sort of say, hey, wait a second, all this data that people are generating is incredibly valuable, and what if we put people at the center of their own data lives? Now, you'll be surprised where this image comes from. Where it comes from is the next slide. So this is sort of like people enter data, stick the data in a personal cloud that's theirs. Theirs to manage, theirs to choose who they trust to host it, theirs to decide how businesses and companies can connect to it. So the question at the bottom says, what if we could collect our own digital dossiers? So this is a World Economic Forum report that I was amongst the community that helped with, actually. It says, innovate around user centricity and trust, define global principles for using and sharing personal data, strengthen the dialogue between regulators and the private sector, focus on interoperability and open standards, and continue to share knowledge. And basically said, look, data is really valuable, and unless it comes into alignment with people, it's going to get regulated in a way that constrains business value, and people are going to freak out. So we got to figure it out. Andy, could you bring me a glass of water, please? Where does this go? So, I thought I'd invite you to, you can talk amongst yourselves now at your table. What kind of data do the students and readers of your publications or faculty at your schools generate in their lives and from what devices? Talk amongst yourselves for a minute. Answer this question. You can find on the Rethinking Personal Data project website. But just the big categories are identity information, asset data, relationships, e-portfolio, government records, health data, communications, activity, content, and context. And that's just one way to sort of break up the world of data. So one way to think about this architecture and to see what it can mean is that individuals with their own personal clouds can connect to each other. And that actually just last week at the Swift conference, Sibos, they launched the Forever Address Service, which is, why don't you connect your friends with between your personal cloud and their personal cloud. And just get out of the business of figuring out how you sync all your devices together. Just have your two clouds talk to each other and pull the data down from there. This is looking at a model of how to leverage a personal cloud where individuals are using it to connect directly to the businesses, services, institutions, community groups that they want to. And they're doing so in sort of proactive, mutual linking way, so that my personal cloud connects to your CRM database or the student record in the university service, and that if I moved, I could just update it and notify the service and not have to get on the phone and send a postcard in and change all that stuff. That there's real value when I actually do business with a bunch of businesses and connect to a bunch of organizations, that I could make this connection. And the term has sort of come to represent this model is called vendor relationship management. So it's tools for the individual to manage their relationship with vendors, just like all the folks who want to connect with us have customer relationship management systems, and this is meeting them in the middle. There's another sort of model is where people look and say, this has been talked about since 1999, and John Hagel invented the term infomediary, where you have a personal cloud and you have a business agent that works on my behalf to try and help me get the products and services that I want from the marketplace. And it's, in a way, it's a corollary to advertising. It's like me making a request of what I like and need, and then hopefully somehow I can be connected to service providers who could make that need. And there's a role for a market in the middle. This is a way to support individuals expressing intent in the market, not necessarily revealing who they are, by having an agent work on their behalf. So some of the folks in the ecosystem are looking at these types of models, issues of scale, and we'll get to how that might be addressed by higher education. But this is one way to think about business opportunity when people sort of take back control of their data and use agents on their behalf. Data aggregation. This is where different tools and services aggregate information about their whole user base, take that big data set, do analysis on it, and then sell that data into a market. Now this has happened for a long, long time in media, where Arbitron and Nielsen, they survey people in depth, great demographic data about what they're watching. And then they take all that and they're trusted to do so by their user base because they're not revealing the data set. They're not saying, Susie watched these television shows. Susie's just one little raindrop in a sea of folks in those data sets. Now, publishers who are publishing different journals And this is speaking to things in this sector, is you could pool data and you could analyze it and have much richer profiles of who's reading what and where, but only if you can manage how you establish enough trust that people feel comfortable sharing more information into those pools of data. But there's a market for the aggregate data sets. It's not all just about targeting the individual. And then there's also this role for collaborative filtering. How do you bring value back to the individual in a way where you're pooling the preferences of a lot of folks and then saying, hey, people who read this also read that. They're also looking at this website, and really, and doing this again without necessarily revealing the specific personal information of these folks. So, this is not my slide. This is John Harrison's slide. Wave your hand, John. There he is. So, this is his description of your world. I think it's, from what I can tell, reflective of reality. In many sectors, they are organization-centric. That the individual is asked to relate separately to all these different institutions. They kind of go batty. You kind of do too. It's just a lot of work. And that there is a vision that this sector could choose to start orienting around these new architectures that are emerging for the personal cloud and support greater efficiencies on both sides, greater utility, and also sort of be in alignment with privacy norms and some of the issues that I've been speaking about. So just to contextualize this and sort of anchor some of what these next diagrams, I thought it made sense to sort of start with this model that is referenced regularly in the sector, which is the credit card model. It has 4 parties in it. It has the individual who has a bank account. There's an issuing bank, the credit card issuer, and on the other side, there's an acquiring bank that gives services to retailers and service providers. And you can have as many, these networks are massive. There's millions and millions of retailers that accept these cards, and there's millions and millions of people, and they're all interoperable across these networks. So, highly scalable systems. And what's in the middle? In the middle is the company Visa, right? Well, it's more complicated than that. It's actually it's a framework that's both technical and legal, so that risk and accountability is managed across the system, and that's why the transactions can happen. It's this middle piece that allows a 4-party system to emerge. And that's what many folks are talking about emerging in the identity space, and getting there, figuring out how you get this middle piece in between so you can have a bigger, more diverse set of players is what we're really working on now. So now this is the same image with the lingo from the personal data space, right? There's the personal cloud, the information broker, the agent working on the individual's behalf. There's an accountability trust framework in the middle, service provider, acquirers on the other side, and retailers, service providers, university, healthcare providers. So that we can, these are starting to be developed both in the US and in the UK, and I think there's lots of opportunities. So that's what John is working on. He's working on this middle piece of building the accountability and trust frameworks that help link these two sides together. This is his drawing. It's the same drawing. It's just got more pieces in it. In the sense that this is the side for the individuals. Those are their service providers, their banks, their data bankers, right? All these analogies start to come in. And on the other side are the larger institutions. And if you figure out the middle, the extensible circle of trust is what he's calling that middle framework piece. you can start to have transactions happening across a whole ecosystem in new ways. Both with the authentication of attributes, which is important, but it doesn't get to the whole picture of this deeper sharing of data and sharing of preferences and enabling new things to happen. So you'll see in a minute all the companies that I've been working with, but these three are based here in the UK. They're all developing personal cloud products. We're actually meeting on Thursday to discuss interoperability so that you are not locked into one service provider. If you don't like them, you can move to another. We do not lock our money in banks. So once you put it there, you can never take it out again. Why would we do the same thing for data? There isn't one bank in the world. Why would there be one social network? You know, we really have to think about how these similar types of systems are already working and build them in around these new assets like data. And so this is all filed. They're launching some services in the UK very soon. It's run by Ian Henderson, very good work. This is Mindex's little diagram showing, you know, this is the idea of a dashboard where you interact with all your different vendors and keep them up to date on the latest information. And then this is just there's lots going on, but don't worry about it all, just focus on those three. These are all the companies in the startup circle that I've been leading that's pretty global. So this whole side is all based in Europe. The middle column is based in California, and the far column is based throughout the rest of the United States. We are actually looking for more European members so we don't end up being North American lopsided too much. And that's my website if you want to go visit us and learn more about what we're doing if you have questions. But really the guy to talk to in this room about how you guys can potentially play a really significant role is John Harrison doing the personal information brokerage. And then I like to invite you all to the Internet Identity Workshop. It's really, really fun. And we actually start with imagine coming here today and it was all of you and then there was no agenda, you just made it up. That's what we do. We do it for 3 days, every 6 months. This will be our 16th one. I'm running a very similar type event in Vienna in February with Marcus Sabadella, who is one of the main developers in the Personal Data Ecosystem. So I will let you guys know when that is, and you can let your members know. You're very welcome to join. But with that, there's just a minute or two for a question, if there are some.
Thank you, Kaliya. Any questions?
It all made sense. Okay. Well, thank you very much.